They had it all, money and fame.
He was making $600 or $700 a year. She was a darling of the press.
And her murder made headlines.
They just blood all over the place.
She put up quite a struggle.
The vicious attack leaves a bloody trail, but where will it end?
He pursued her. He was surveilling her.
They're going to extremes to prevent anyone from knowing where they were.
We had a much bigger crime than what we thought.
Sarasota, Florida, November 7th, 1997. It's a sunny autumn day in the wealthy seaside town that's home to many snowbirds and retirees. But at 4:20 that Friday afternoon, the city's 911 dispatch center receives a distressing call.
This is the 911 center. What's the matter? Mom. Oh my God. My mom is dead.
Okay, what makes you think that?
There's blood all over the place.
Okay, who else is in the house there?
I have my brothers and sisters.
How old are you?
I'm 13.
This is a teenage girl who's just gotten home from school, and she finds her mother on the kitchen floor, dead.
The daughter had come home from school, and the brothers and sister were wandering around crying, and she found her mother.
Is the person that did this to her still there?
Oh, I don't think
so. Okay. Calm down. We have help on the way.
I was dispatched as the primary unit to respond to the house. And it took me a few minutes to get there, but I ended up going in first.
Inside, police find 13-year-old Stevie Bellish in the kitchen.
She was standing over her mother, who was on the floor. Obvious blood, gunshot wound to the face. She'd been there for a little while. There's definitely no signs of life.
4 small children, bloody and distraught, but apparently unhurt, are also in the room.
First thing that we want to do is clear the residence. I had Stevie go outside and start bringing her siblings outside.
Once the children are outside, police clear the rest of the house.
I started going room to room, making sure that there was no other victims or any of the suspects. Looking under the beds, just looking for anybody that's there to do harm or other victims. Unfortunately, there was none.
The scene secured. Paramedics rush into the kitchen.
Scenes like this, it's pretty tough to forget. It is readily apparent that there was nothing that we were going to be able to do for her.
Stevie Bellish identifies the victim as her mother, 35-year-old Sheila Bellish. Sheila Lee Walsh was born in 1962 in Topeka, Kansas, to an Air Force pilot father and stay-at-home mom.
She lost her father when she was 10. He was shot down in a mission in Vietnam. Sheila's father was more than a role model to her. He was her hero, and she wanted to make him proud. She graduated high school in 1982 and started a job as a receptionist at a local law firm, and that's where she met her future husband, Alan Van Hout. It was kind of a whirlwind romance. He proposed to her on their 3rd date, and 3 months later they were married.
Alan soon became a successful businessman, the owner of a medical supply company in Bend, Oregon.
He had made a lot of money. I believe he was making $600 or $700 a year on that medical equipment business.
Now multi-millionaires, the couple relocated to Hawaii and then to San Antonio, Texas.
Alan actually told me, man, one of the most beautiful times he had was living in Hawaii for 2 years. He actually owned a yacht. He said Hawaii is very expensive, but he loved it. That's like the best place in the world to live.
Somewhere in that same time frame, he changed his name to Alan Blackthorne.
He was just like a playboy. He got money, I think he might have had a 911 Porsche.
In the mid-1980s, the playboy became a family man. He and Sheila had 2 daughters, but the marriage didn't last.
Everything seemed like it was wonderful until kids come, a lot of stress come, a lot of different moves people make, they not going in the same direction. I mean, hey, that's why things get dissolved.
There had been a divorce. There had been litigation. There had been child support issues.
Sheila eventually received full custody of her 2 daughters. And in 1992, the single mom fell in love with a pharmaceutical salesman named Jamie Bellish. A year later, the couple married.
They really wanted the family. They had some difficulty getting pregnant, so they decided to try IVF treatment, and it ended up working a little too well.
In December 1995, Sheila gave birth to 3 sons and a daughter, and local media dubbed her the Quad Mom.
When she gave birth to the quads, it was a big media event here in San Antonio.
She was kind of a celebrity.
She was a darling of the press. It made a lot of news.
In 1997, the family of 8 relocated to Sarasota, Florida to start a new life.
He got a promotion in the Sarasota, Florida area, and they packed up and moved.
But for Sheila Bellish, it was the beginning of the end. On November 7th, just 6 weeks after leaving Texas, the 35-year-old mother of 6 is found dead in her home, surrounded by her 4 youngest children.
None of them appeared injured, but they did have some blood on them. There was blood on their feet, it was on their hands. Some of them, I recall, it was on their the life vests that they were wearing.
We wondered why the children were in life jackets. It did look like they might have been out by the pool at some point, but we didn't know when or what time that might have occurred. It doesn't appear from the blood spatter that the children were close when this happened. It appears more like the children came to find their mother and were walking around her after she had passed.
Investigators want to know who could do something as horrible as killing a mother while her young children are in the house.
What's the motive? What is the possible motive for anyone to do what they did to her?
Coming up, police take a closer look at Sheila and Jamie's marriage.
Typically, when you have any kind of homicide, you always start with the inner circle, which would be her current husband.
On November 7th, 1997, police find mother of 6, Sheila Bellish, murdered inside her Florida home. The brutality of the crime shocks even the most seasoned investigators.
This was clearly a homicide. She had her throat cut, had a bullet hole in her cheek.
She had some defensive wounds on her hands and arms.
She put up quite a struggle, and to me, that's a mother's instinct. She had those kids there with her, and she was thinking of her kids.
The trail of blood leading from the kitchen suggests the attack started elsewhere.
Despite severe and ultimately lethal wounds, she actually crawled down a hallway from a utility room.
From where the initial attack had taken place to where Sheila eventually passed away, it was approximately 17 feet.
There were blood splatter marks on the baseboard and somewhat up the wall, every few feet. What was happening was she was crawling to get to the phone, and she was collapsing. She'd lost so much blood and was losing blood. She'd collapse every foot or so, and she'd smack on the floor, and it would throw blood up on the wall.
She had managed to get to the phone and get it off the receiver, off the hook, but she was never able to dial 911. It was an old rotary phone, so anybody who remembers the old rotary phones knows that dialing the 9 is the longest time it takes to dial. And I always did wonder if it had been a push-button phone, if she might have been able to at least get 911 pressed.
Investigators find no sign of forced entry, but the door between the utility room and the garage is open.
It's believed that that door had been unlocked.
In the utility room off the garage, evidence techs find a bloody knife on the floor.
It appeared to be a match to a set of knives that was located in the kitchen on a magnetic rack. The knife had approximately a 7-inch blade.
Investigators also find a .45 caliber shell casing and a bullet hole in the wall.
The shell casing was located in the utility room on top of the washer and dryer.
Since it appears to be where the shooting occurred, crime scene investigators pay special attention to the utility room when processing the house for clues.
We knew for a fact that the suspect had been in those areas. And we did develop a fingerprint on the side of the dryer. They all get submitted to the latent print division of the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office.
But the results will take time.
In 1997, we were doing most of our latent print comparison manually, which meant a human would sit there and do a one-to-one comparison. So it's impossible to just go through the fingerprint files and start doing comparisons like they do now.
Police are also canvassing the neighborhood looking for additional leads.
The neighborhood they lived in was a quiet neighborhood. Most people were retired. Back then, we probably had 5 or 6 homicides a year in Sarasota County. But it wasn't something that would happen in that neighborhood ever. So when it did happen, people were like, everybody talked about it.
Several witnesses did report having seen a man walk around in camouflage clothing and combat boots in the neighborhood, which they seemed to think was unusual.
Finally, investigators turn to Sheila's daughter, Stevie, but the distraught teen has little to give them.
She was the first one to arrive home from school, and she saw her mother laying on the floor, and she made the 911 call.
After talking to a shaken Stevie, investigators turn their attention to the teen's stepfather, who they'll need to eliminate as a suspect.
Typically, when you have any kind of homicide, you always start with the inner circle and work your way outward. So we initially had to start with her current husband, which is Jamie Bellish. And we looked into where he was that day.
He was interviewed by some sheriff's deputies in Sarasota. He was absolutely heartbroken and devastated.
He told us where he was. He was a salesman for pharmaceuticals, so he had different places that he had been that day.
Jamie said he left the house around 7:30 a.m. He stopped and had breakfast, and then he went to Fort Myers to meet with some clients. He left there around 3 p.m., went to meet with a contractor who was working on the new house.
We were able to later, shortly thereafter, verify everywhere he was.
They quickly concluded he had no involvement in it.
However, when investigators ask who might have reason to hurt Sheila, Jamie Bellish suggests that her ex, Alan Blackthorne, might have something to do with Sheila's death.
They had a very rocky marriage. She filed for divorce. He very much resented it, and they fought constantly for at least 10 years.
Jamie says it got so bad that they decided to move away from Texas.
She wanted to get out of Texas because he was always taking her in and out of court, trying to get custody of the kids, and she had about enough of it. So she left Texas and didn't let him know where she was.
I think it was only Sheila's sister that knew where she was, and 1 or 2 very close friends who fully understood that they were not to tell anyone.
Coming up, did the family's disappearance push Alan Blackthorne over the edge?
He had lost, and it became clear that Mr. Blackthorne hated to lose.
In Sarasota, Florida, police investigating the murder of Sheila Bellish have identified a possible suspect, her ex-husband, Alan Blackthorne.
They had been fighting back and forth for, could be close to a decade, from the time of the divorce until 1997. And he would file motions for custody or to reduce child support, and She would file motions to restrict his ability to visit his children. She would file motions to increase child support. It went on and on and on and on.
In early 1997, Alan Blackthorne abruptly surrendered.
He shows up and tells his lawyer that he wants to abandon all rights to the children. He wants to surrender his parental rights. He signed essentially documents giving up any parental rights to his children. And that was a loss. That was a big loss.
While Sheila and Jamie were happy to finally have full legal custody, the fear that her ex had another plan up his sleeve still kept Sheila up at night.
Sheila was a nervous wreck.
And Alan being a very wealthy guy, and she was afraid of him.
He had lost. As we spoke with witnesses, it became clear that Mr. Blackthorne hated to lose.
Jamie and Sheila had quietly relocated the family to Florida.
Jamie was a pharmaceutical representative, and his company agreed to let him move his territory, and they saw an attorney to learn how to purchase that house without being a matter of public record. They were going almost to extremes to prevent anyone publicly from knowing where they were.
Despite their precautions, had Alan managed to locate his ex-wife?
Police contacted airlines and car rental companies to see if Blackthorne had been in the area recently, but they didn't come up with anything.
Placing him in Florida was a long shot at that point.
Sarasota investigators also reach out to authorities in Texas, who contact Blackthorne at his home in San Antonio on November 8, 1997.
He claims he had nothing to do with Sheila's murder, and he just found out about it on the news. Police said he didn't seem like he was trying to hide anything.
We found pretty soon that he was in Texas and couldn't have committed this crime.
But if Alan Blackthorne didn't kill Sheila, who did? Over the next 24 hours, investigators pieced together a series of clues.
They were canvassing the area, and they found an employee at a gas station who remembered a man coming in and asking for directions. The address that he was asking for was Mark Ridge, which is the neighborhood where Sheila lived. They also spoke with a neighbor who said they saw something strange around 9:15 a.m. on the day Sheila was killed.
There was a guy that happened to see a strange vehicle in the neighborhood.
The driver was a young man wearing camouflage.
This is a retirement community. Why would anybody be wearing camouflage outfit, combat boots in this neighborhood?
The witness doesn't know the stranger's identity, but he may be able to help investigators find the suspicious car.
He was able to actually give us a tag number, which was a huge break. And we did run that tag in Florida and got nothing, but we knew that they had just moved from Texas, and we ran that tag out of Texas, and it came back.
The vehicle is registered to a woman living in La Pryor, Texas, which is a small town just southwest of San Antonio. When police contacted the owner, she said her grandson was the person who primarily used the car, and his name was Jose Del Toro.
After a little digging, detectives learned that Del Toro is a small-time criminal from San Antonio.
He's in a work release program after a theft conviction, but he didn't show up that weekend.
We needed to talk to him, and in the meantime, Texas Rangers had located his vehicle and were sitting on it. We kind of thought there'd be a lot of valuable evidence in the car, but we needed some evidence to get a search warrant.
While Texas Rangers watched Del Toro's car, investigators in Sarasota contact local hotels, searching for evidence he'd been in the area.
They got a hit on the name at a hotel just a few miles away from the crime scene. Guest records show Del Toro stayed there on November 6th, the night before the murder.
He did use his own driver's license for ID.
Then, hoping to place Del Toro at the scene of the crime, investigators request a copy of his fingerprints from authorities in Texas.
The Sarasota County Sheriff's Office completed a 1-to-1 comparison of the prints from Jose Del Toro to the latent print that was lifted from the utility room, and they determined that it was a match to Jose Del Toro.
When we got that fingerprint hit, that was enough to get us a search warrant. And then when we did a search warrant on his car, we found the murder weapon. We found the receipt for the camouflage clothing that he bought right down the street from the crime scene. So we had a ton of evidence on him.
Coming up, investigators are convinced that they've found Sheila's killer. But they'll soon be wondering, was he acting alone?
When the conspiracy theory came out, then we knew we had a much bigger crime than what we thought.
Investigators in Florida have identified a prime suspect for the murder of Sheila Bellish, a small-time criminal from San Antonio, Texas, named Jose Del Toro.
We had his fingerprints at the crime scene.
Searching Del Toro's car, investigators also found the murder weapon and a receipt for the camouflage clothing witnesses described.
His vehicle was parked outside of one of his girlfriend's house down in San Antonio.
The girlfriend said she didn't know anything about Sheila's murder. She said Del Toro told her he was headed to Miami to make a drug deal. But she said if Del Toro was involved, his cousin Sammy would know about it.
Del Toro is still on the run, but on November 12, 1997, Texas Rangers locate his cousin, Samuel Gonzalez, and bring him in for questioning.
Tell me what you know about this incident.
Supposed to be just a beating and nothing about the killing was supposed to be occurred. And up to the point when I heard about that and saw the news and was kind of sad about it and disgusted about it.
Gonzalez tells investigators that his friend Danny Rocha had approached him a few months earlier with a job offer.
That's when the conspiracy theory came out, and then we knew we had a much bigger crime than what we thought.
He told us that he was asked to beat up Sheila, and he said, "I can't hit a woman."
Danny started talking about the money involved and said it could be as much as $10,000. And Sammy said he thought his cousin might be interested. His cousin was Joey Del Toro.
Those two traveled to the Bellish residence in Bernie, Texas. Timing was good for her. She got away.
They looked in the windows, and there was just very little bit of furniture. And so they reported to Rocha that it looked like no one was living there.
Gonzalez says Rocha had reached out to him again on November 5th with a new address for Sheila Bellish in Sarasota, Florida, and that he'd passed the information along to Del Toro.
Okay, so he's supposed to go down to Florida, punch her, and that's it. All right, what happens next?
Sammy claims that Del Toro came back on November 8th and told him that he had fired a gun at Sheila.
He said he shot her, but he didn't know if he hit her or not, and so I didn't want to hear about it. So.
He said he shot at her, but didn't know if he hit her?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
you mentioned anything about cutting her?
No, he didn't.
According to Gonzalez, killing Sheila wasn't explicitly part of the plan, but that he wasn't surprised it happened.
Danny had asked Joey to beat her up in a way that she was not able to take care of the kids. But he said that the best way to do it, just if you want to use 10 grand, is to kill her.
But when investigators ask Gonzalez if he knows where they can find Del Toro, he tells them that Sheila's killer has already fled to Mexico.
Joey is told by someone who had spoken to his grandmother that the police were looking for him, and he was wanted in connection with the murder of a woman in Sarasota. So he takes a bus to the border and walks across the border, and he's gone.
With Del Toro on the run, Investigators focus on the men who allegedly hired him, and the man they suspect is behind it all, Alan Blackthorne.
Why would Danny Rocha? Why would Sammy Gonzalez? Why would Del Toro put a hit on Sheila in Florida? It makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. But if Mr. Blackthorne comes into the picture, it makes all the sense in the world.
Talking to associates of both Alan Blackthorne and Danny Rocha, investigators soon established that there is a connection between the two men.
Alan Blackthorne and Danny Rocha's relationship, everybody knew about it. They were big-ass golf buddies.
Danny Rocha was a very good golfer, not PGA quality, but he was a very good amateur golfer. And he gambled.
He was a golf hustler, and he would play golf with Alan Blackthorne and make a lot of money because he usually would win.
The bets were sometimes $1,000 a hole.
But we needed to get Danny Rocha to get to Alan Blackthorne.
Investigators suspect that Blackthorne had also offered Rocha 10 times that amount to get rid of his ex-wife.
It all came back pointing towards Alan Blackthorne.
Sammy Gonzalez's statement gives the authorities enough evidence to take the golf hustler into custody for conspiracy to commit murder on November 17th.
The Texas Rangers actually went to his house and arrested him, brought him to jail in San Antonio, and then we extradited him back to Sarasota.
Getting him to talk isn't as easy.
I sat in on some of the debriefings of Sammy and Danny, which could be brutally difficult.
We didn't get much from him.
Rocha refuses to flip on Blackthorne, but will the investigation be stalled for long?
November 20th, investigators find out that Del Toro's been arrested in Monterrey, Mexico.
Then we had to try to get him back from Mexico. And that turned into a political circus because at the time, Mexico would not let you extradite anybody out of there if you had a death sentence on the table.
Coming up, with Mexico being a possible dead end, investigators try a different approach and hit a new roadblock.
So I said, "You're going to get life in prison." And he said, "I'll roll the dice."
By mid-December of 1997, 1 month after the brutal murder of Sheila Bellish, authorities believe they are close to unraveling the conspiracy that led to her death. Suspected triggerman Jose Del Toro is in a Mexican jail, awaiting extradition.
All the politicians had to get involved and try to work out those details.
Samuel Gonzalez has already agreed to a plea deal for his role in the plot.
Sammy was just a big teddy bear. I don't think he would even get in a fist fight, so I think he got used in the whole process, to be honest with you. But he did get the best deal because he cooperated.
Alleged middleman Danny Rocha has refused to cooperate, but on December 16th, prosecutors charge him with criminal solicitation to commit capital murder and pressure him to turn on Sheila's ex, Alan Blackthorne, the alleged mastermind behind the murder.
I went to the jail and I interviewed him several times because we really wanted Blackthorne.
Eventually, between the jail interviews and statements Rocha makes to the media, investigators piece together what happened.
Danny was looking for some money, and he had some ideas in his head about how he might be able to start a business or whatever with Mr. Blackthorne. And Mr. Blackthorne started talking about Sheila and started talking about how bad of a person she was, how bad of a parent she was, and verbalizing that he would like to see something happen to her. He'd like to see her beat up, and asking Danny about it.
Danny, in addition to making money, a lot of money, gambling on golf with Blackthorne, was a bookie. So apparently Alan thought that he had connections with unsavory underworld type people, but he really didn't. And so Danny asked Sam Gonzalez if he would get involved in having this ex-wife beaten up.
Before they could do it, Sheila and her family moved to Florida, which just made Alan even angrier.
Alan Blackthorne can't lose. No matter what he has to do, he's going to win. He had the mentality that he's rich and he's not going to lose his kids to anybody.
He hires a private detective to track Sheila down.
When she moved to Florida, he pursued her there. He was surveilling her. He was following her.
As soon as the private detective located Sheila, Blackthorne had gone back to Danny Rocha.
Blackthorne told Rocha that there'll be $50,000 in it if I get my children back. And Danny says she'd have to be hurt pretty badly for you to get the children. And he said, that's fine. That conversation was repeated a couple of times. One time, Blackthorne said to him, look, the best way for them to do this is to kill her and dump her in the ocean or bury her in the woods.
One time, he made a statement. He wanted her thrown to the alligators.
With new marching orders from Blackthorne, Danny Rocha alerted Sammy Gonzalez, who contacted Jose Del Toro and set the whole plan in motion.
Del Toro drove basically straight through to Sarasota. He also, during that time, made dozens of phone calls on his cell phone.
He was a good-looking kid. He had a lot of girlfriends. He was on the phone with one or more of them throughout the trip. So that way we sent a subpoena to whatever cell phone company Del Toro was using for his cell phone. And using repeating towers, we were able to show the entire trip.
After Joey Del Toro butchered Sheila, Danny goes over to Blackthorne's house. And Danny says, yeah, they did it. I need some money to give to Del Toro, and I need $10,000. Blackthorne said, you guys fucked up. Because he had already heard that she had been found in her house. He knew before Rocha got there that Sheila had been killed. And she was found in the kitchen of her house. And he had instructed them to bury her in the woods or dump her in the ocean.
Despite being stiffed by Blackthorne, Rocha refuses to testify in court against his old golfing buddy.
The state of Florida, the Sarasota County District Attorney, was trying to coordinate with the Bexar County, Texas DA to work out a deal. They can't work it out. And his case went to trial.
So I said, you're going to get life in prison. And he said, I'll roll the dice.
When he goes on trial in January of 1999, the jury finds Danny Rocha guilty of first-degree murder. He's sentenced to life in prison.
Danny Rocha got exactly what he deserves. I think he'll die in prison.
However, Rocha's refusal to testify against him means that Alan Blackthorne remains free.
I think his wealth, maybe that gave him a sense of invincibility. He was out there after the murder and on like the evening news once in a while.
Blackthorne was so arrogant, it was irritating or aggravating. And he accused Jamie Bellish of being the cause, if not the actual murderer in the case. And frankly, it pissed us off.
Determined to get Blackthorne, investigators continue working the case. And in July of '99, make a major breakthrough.
Mexico agrees to extradite Del Toro and return him to Florida.
Coming up, with Del Toro's plea, only the alleged mastermind behind the murder remains at large. But will Alan Blackthorne ever face justice?
Sometimes if you got money, you can get away with substantial things.
In July of 1999, Florida authorities have finally apprehended the man who killed Sheila Bellish, 24-year-old Jose Del Toro.
He certainly wasn't a professional. He got into something way over his head.
After pleading guilty to Sheila's murder, Del Toro gives investigators a detailed confession.
What happened is that Jose Del Toro sat in the garage area for a bit until he felt comfortable enough to come into the house.
He was in the house for like an hour watching her, and he said he was getting ready to leave because he didn't want to do it, and she noticed him. When their eyes met, he panicked, and he said it was too late then. He had to go do what he had to do.
Del Toro's confession also implicates the man investigators believe is the mastermind behind Sheila's murder. Her ex-husband, Alan Blackthorne.
He talked about how Blackthorne told him what a bad woman she was.
But even with Del Toro's confession, Blackthorne will be difficult to prosecute.
Texas has a code of criminal procedure. You cannot get a conviction based on an accomplice's testimony unless that is corroborated and links the defendant to the crime. And they tried every way they could to find that corroboration, but they were having trouble finding it. As time went on, it became more and more clear that they had a problem doing that, and that they might not ever get a conviction in state court, and that the proper venue for it would be federal court.
Prosecutors down in Texas, federal prosecutors, decided that there was a federal crime, planning a crime across state lines.
On January 4th, 2000, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Western Texas issues an arrest warrant for Alan Blackthorne.
Blackthorne was arrested in the parking lot of his country club.
We put him in the car, advised him of his rights, and then we took him down to the FBI office for being processed.
In June of 2000, Blackthorne finally stands trial for the murder of his ex-wife.
He was very cocky at the trial and was doing interviews with the press every day and thought it was a big joke. And he thought he was going to walk on this thing. But the two federal prosecutors were great, and they did their homework.
The circumstantial evidence in this case was very, very strong. Mr. Blackthorne was a very controlling man. He was a man that was very angry about this divorce. He was very angry about the custody of his children. He was obsessed about it.
She eventually prevailed, moved away. He couldn't control her anymore. And that was a good part of our proof, good meaning large part of our proof at the trial, to demonstrate why he would go to the trouble to have her killed.
Prosecutors also put the other members of the conspiracy on the stand, including Blackthorne's old golfing buddy, Danny Rocha, who finally agrees to testify.
They were the witnesses that were going to make or break this case. If they were believed, we had a solid shot at obtaining a conviction and gaining justice. Their information had to be corroborated in state court, but it just had to be believed in federal court.
Will the jury believe them? On July 6th, 2000, they announced their decision.
The jury came back with guilty verdicts to both counts in the indictment.
It's taken almost 3 years, but the man most responsible for Sheila Bellish's death has finally been brought to justice.
But justice is an imperfect thing. Mr. Bellish will never get Sheila back. Sheila's gone forever. The kids had to live through this horrible nightmare.
But then you think about the emotional trauma of 4 children walking around their mother in the blood.
And then poor Stevie, 13 years old, came home from school and found her mother. It's heartbreaking. The damage and heartbreak that he caused all those people.
A tragedy like this is never forgotten. Jamie will never forget it, and the kids will, although they were quite young and won't remember it, they'll know of it, and they'll know what happened to their mother.
She was a great lady and a great mother. A lot of times, people that get murdered have a lot to do with why they got murdered. In this case, she did nothing. She was the most innocent victim you could find.
was a wealthy businesswoman in love with a ranch hand.
Kathleen was a very well-respected businesswoman in Vail. Everybody liked her.
He loved to laugh, and he just was a good time to be around.
Until their Western-style romance went dangerously wrong.
Please help him. He doesn't deserve to die.
And it's up to investigators to unravel the truth.
He told her that he was a hitman and had killed 32 people.
Guns and drugs is a very dangerous cocktail.
That was the point of no return.
June 27th, 2002. It's a quiet Thursday afternoon in rural Colorado when an Eagle County 911 operator gets a call from a local businesswoman named Kathleen Denson.
She had called 911 to report that she had just shot her boyfriend.
I think it does. Kathy, you have the gun in your hand. No, it's on the table. Kathy, where was he shot? In his heart. Please help him. He doesn't deserve to die.
Kathy says the victim is her ex-boyfriend, Gerald Cody Boyd, and claims the shooting was in self-defense.
While on the line with 911, Kathleen Denson was nearly hysterical. She didn't want Cody Boyd to die. She did tell the dispatcher that he was demanding money from her, but she was almost hysterical with the fear that he would die.
Police and paramedics are immediately dispatched to Denson's home, located on a sprawling 77-acre horse ranch in Eagle, Colorado.
Vail is about 15 miles up the river from Eagle. It's a very rich ski town.
I was at the sheriff's office at the time that the call came in, so I was actually one of the first officers on scene. As we're approaching the scene, there's a lot of things going through your mind as an officer. Is she still armed? Are there any other people in the residence? Any dangers that we need to be aware of as we're going up to that?
Officers find Kathy outside, still on the phone with 911.
I'll never forget the scene as going in. You could still smell the discharge of the firearm. You can smell the burnt black powder as you enter the residence. And then we went in and discovered the body in the living room. Mr. Boyd was laying on his back when I walked in. He was lifeless, and I could tell what appeared to be a gunshot wound on the left side of his chest.
It's already too late. He is found dead at the scene.
The first thing that I was curious about was what her story was.
There were absolutely no signs of a struggle that we were able to determine at the scene. There was no indication that she had any injuries whatsoever.
Investigators can't help but wonder if there was more to the story than Kathy will admit. From the beginning, Kathleen and Cody's relationship had been unconventional. He was just a simple cowboy, but Kathy had been born into money as the daughter of a successful Colorado furrier.
Her father started that company. She inherited it and grew it.
There's no doubt that Kathleen Denson was a very well-respected businesswoman in Vail. She ran the first store, and everybody liked her.
She actually had not just the store in Vail that was very successful. She had 2 shops in Aspen, which is about 100 miles away. That was a very successful operation, made her a lot of money, and her shops were known for very high-quality merchandise.
But while selling furs became her profession, horses had always been her passion.
Kathleen was also known by the quarter horse set because she had a lovely 77-acre quarter horse ranch, Dragon A.
She was raising quarter horses. That's not a cheap hobby, so I assume that she was doing very well.
Her ranch, I'm sure, was quite well known, and her breeding operation was quite well known. It was her first stores that made her a wealthy woman. If she had positive income from the ranch, that was a big plus.
In the late 90s, she'd hired Cody Boyd to help her run the place.
He had bounced around the valley already 3 or 4 years here, and he had had odd jobs.
What I can remember about Cody Boyd is he had a strong personality. He also liked to have a good time.
He had a bit of a reputation as a ladies' man because apparently he was charming as hell. He just had this kind of just lovely Western drawl, and he had a twinkle in his eye, and he loved pulp stories, and he loved to laugh, and he just was a good time to be around.
Cody had been on the job for a few years when he divorced his wife. Soon after, their relationship became more than just professional.
It quickly developed into a romantic relationship. And then she provided for him, both as a handyman as well as her boyfriend.
As the story goes, he eventually went from the bunkhouse out to the ranch house and started living with Kathleen. Here's a wealthy, beautiful woman with money and land. It must have been an incredibly tempting situation for Cody Boyd.
In some cases, it's the allure and the mystery, the unknown, of really an opposite. So in some cases, the most passionate, fiery love affairs are born of these very different backgrounds.
Despite their differences, Kathy and Cody seemed to be happy together. So how had their romance ended? And why had it resulted in bloodshed?
It's hard to say exactly when things began to go south between Cody Boyd and Kathleen Denson. Cody Boyd convinced Kathleen Denson that he really, really loved her. That's completely at odds with the picture that emerged in the investigation.
Coming up, investigators uncover ties between the victim and organized crime.
Boyd was gregarious, articulate, friendly, but he absolutely had a dark side.
Sheriff's deputies near Vail, Colorado have arrested local businesswoman Kathy Denson for killing her ex-boyfriend, 45-year-old Cody Boyd.
We had a body laying inside the residence. We knew we had a person who claims to have shot the person that's laying inside the residence. So the first thing we got to do is we got to secure that scene.
One of the first things that seems out of place is the murder weapon itself.
She had set the gun down, actually on the table in the kitchen.
It was an unusual weapon that she used. It was a black powder gun.
That's one of the oddest things about the Denson case. This was a replica of a 19th century black powder pistol. Hardly the most effective murder weapon out there.
Because it makes a lot of smoke when you shoot them, and there's a recoil, and you have to cock it by the hammer to shoot it, and it's kind of fun to play old-time cowboy and load them and that sort of thing.
It wasn't what you would have used had you had any kind of prior notice that you'd have to defend yourself. In fact, it might have been the last weapon you'd use in that particular home.
But the antique pistol was powerful enough to kill Cody Boyd almost instantly.
Make no mistake about it, that is a very deadly firearm.
Mr. Boyd was laying on his back when I walked in. He was lifeless, and I could tell that what appeared to be a gunshot wound on the left side of his chest.
There was no signs of any struggle or any mark other than the gigantic gaping wound of the half-inch metal ball that killed him.
That bullet pushed through almost, I would say, 12 inches or more of bone and flesh.
Investigators find no evidence of a struggle.
As far as around Mr. Boyd, the decedent, we didn't locate anything of suspicious activity around him. There was no other weapons, nothing else that we had found indicating that Mr. Boyd was armed or anything like that.
To get a better sense of Cody and Kathleen's relationship, detectives speak to friends and other employees.
In interviewing the hired hands there at the ranch and also interviewing neighbors, we're talking to those folks to try to help us paint the picture of what kind of person she is, what kind of person Mr. Boyd is.
They discover that the romance had been over for a while now, and money seems to have been the root of the problem.
As far as we know, Cody Boyd had nothing when he came to know Kathleen Denson. He really fit the role of the misfit, the ne'er-do-well, not someone who was successful in life.
The word was that she had paid about $100,000 worth of his business expenses.
Kathleen had purchased like a motorcycle for Cody, had purchased a semi for Cody. I believe there was a Corvette that was purchased as well, but things started going south.
Friends also point to the drastic differences in the couple's personalities. While Kathy was quiet and reserved, Cody was larger than life and liked to tell stories about his checkered past.
Boyd bragged incessantly about his claim that in his prior life he was a mafia hitman, and he certainly had the guns and ammo to make that seem convincing.
The sheriffs discovered on the ranch a big gun safe, and in the gun safe there were at least half a dozen high-powered semi-automatic weapons.
You didn't have to be a very good shot. You just had to hold the trigger down and let the 20 rounds per second be expelled from your firearm. A nasty, nasty set of guns, to be sure.
In fact, it turned out Cody had purchased the antique pistol that killed him.
And it was a Christmas gift to Kathleen, who was living out on the ranch, from Boyd. And that's one of the great ironies of this. This was not a modern firearm. And even an original black powder pistol has a significant percentage of misfires. This is not a safe firearm to be firing, let alone being fired at.
It doesn't seem like the kind of weapon one might choose if they were planning to commit murder, which supports Kathy's story. The medical examiner's autopsy report is also in her favor.
The evidence was pretty clear that he was high on cocaine, and the evidence that she would be legitimately afraid of this man with whom she'd had a long-term romantic relationship.
Cocaine is a stimulant, and it acts on the reward center of the brain, the pleasure center of the brain. So the combination of euphoria with impulsivity and the reduction of the ability to put the brakes on can be a really dangerous combination.
Guns and drugs is a very dangerous cocktail.
It seems to be a clear-cut case of self-defense, until a new witness steps forward with a different story to tell. Coming up, Kathy is betrayed by one of her closest friends.
She wanted to let us know that Kathleen Denson is not who a lot of people think that she is.
After the first day of the investigation, it looks like modern-day cowboy Cody Boyd was killed by Kathy Denson in self-defense. However, Colorado police are about to learn that his ex-girlfriend's motives might not have been so innocent after all.
So what became apparent as we continued with this investigation was that it appeared that this was some sort of a love triangle. We knew that they were boyfriend-girlfriend, but then there's also this third person that comes into the picture, Monica Seebacher. She goes by Monique.
Monique was I believe a manager for the Vail store and was an employee of Kathleen's for several years.
Kathleen and Monique were basically also best of friends, and that certainly Kathleen confided in Monique.
However, it seems that friendship had been stretched to the breaking point. And when Monique learns about the shooting, she comes forward to tell Eagle County investigators what she knows.
She was a very forthcoming witness and wanted to be able to tell her side of the story. She wanted to let us know that Kathleen Denson is not who a lot of people think that she is.
He was in love with me, and things just, started escalating from there.
Monique Seebacher said that the reason why Kathleen Denson shot and killed Cody Boyd was because Cody loved Monique and not Kathy Denson. Now, whether that was true, I don't know.
According to Monique, her relationship with Cody began after Kathy kicked him out of the house.
2 years ago, Kathleen told me that her and Cody were having problems, and I had a 2-bedroom condo. She asked me if he could stay there while, maybe they work some things out.
It turned out to be a little bit of a disaster because Kathleen still loved Cody Boyd. And yet here she is shoving him out of the ranch and into the arms of another woman.
She wanted things to work out between them. And instead, he started a relationship with her friend.
The relationship between Seebacher and Boyd was certainly something that she wasn't thrilled about.
Monique says she tried to preserve her friendship with Kathy, but it was clear that she was still in love with Cody and unwilling to let him move on.
Certainly, Kathleen confided in Monique. I think the evidence showed Monique that wasn't always that straightforward and confiding everything back in Kathleen.
It made things very awkward for Kathleen.
Beyond the exterior, which she was effective, she was savvy, she ran a good business, was I would have to say, a pretty tortured personality and soul, and pretty conflicted.
Monique explains that because both she and Cody depended on Kathy for their livelihoods, they tried their best to keep their romance a secret. She confesses that Kathy's generosity came with other perks as well.
All three of them had pretty strong drug habits, particularly with the drug of choice in the glitzy ski resorts, that being cocaine. And she, Kathleen, had the money to keep them well supplied. Basically, she's supporting him and his drug habit, giving him lavish gifts.
She bought him a car, guns. He basically had money to do whatever he wanted.
But all along, what Cody really wanted was Monique.
For Boyd, he had the best of both worlds. He had a woman that he was getting money from and another woman who seemed to dote on him. It must have been an incredibly tempting situation for Cody Boyd.
Monique questioned him, "Why are you still going to see Kathleen?" And he says, "It's really hard for me to break up with her after all these years." That's pretty unusual, that kind of relationship, and the people involved, they're different. They're definitely different.
Monique says the beginning of the end came a few weeks before the shooting, when Kathleen asked her to help pick out an engagement ring.
There was a lot of talk of marriage, even to the extent that Kathleen had bought Cody a ring and she was going to or getting ready to propose.
Seebacher was a friend, at least that's how Kathleen considered her, and so it made things very awkward.
But the situation grew even more awkward when Kathy confided that she was planning a romantic getaway with Cody to pop the question.
Kathleen wanted to go with Cody to Cancun on a holiday trip. And Cody says, "If Monique cannot go with me and you, I'm not going to Cancun." So Kathleen was forced into kind of taking Monique.
Coming up, it's a tropical vacation none of them would ever forget.
The three of them agreed to go as a group to Cancun, and that's when things really fell apart.
As Colorado detectives untangle the love triangle between Cody Boyd, Monique Seebacher, and Kathy Denson, they begin to realize that Kathy had plenty of motive to kill her former lover. But what would she have to say about her best friend's accusations?
We wanted to find out exactly what happened. What are the circumstances that led up to this, and what led you, the suspect, to shoot the person that ultimately died? And so that's what we were trying to do as far as interviewing Ms. Denson to get her side of the story to help put the pieces of this puzzle together.
Under interrogation by Colorado police, Kathy asks for her attorneys and gives them little. But friends present a slightly different story from Monique's.
Kathleen Denson struggled with cocaine use during the period of time that she was with Cody Boyd, and that was part of the problem with him. Everyone wants to be loved, and Cody Boyd convinced Kathleen Denson that he really, really loved her. More and more, Cody Boyd was not just asking for things like a Corvette or a Harley. He was insisting on Kathleen giving him huge sums of money, and that really opened her eyes to what he was really all about.
But drug use and extravagant spending weren't the only dangerous things about him.
He told her that he was a hitman and had killed 32 people and was a bad hombre.
Kathleen Denson was looking for love in the wrong place, because Cody Boyd was trouble from the get-go.
At first, Cody's bad boy act was a turn-on for Kathy. It wasn't until their trip to Cancun that she realized just how terrifying he could be.
If somebody is highly invested in being an outlaw or a bad boy, then citing gun ownership or citing violence that they may have perpetrated demonstrates to another person that they've attained this level of expertise or competence in their so-called domain.
Kathy financed the luxurious trip and says that when she agreed to bring Monique with them, she didn't know Cody had ulterior motives.
The trip to Cancun was between Monique, Cody, and Kathleen. And during that trip is when Kathleen had started to realize that there was a relationship going on between Cody and Monique.
She brought a ring to Cancun to propose marriage, and he had turned her down.
It would have been horrible to find out that your boyfriend, your lover, is with your best friend when you took them on vacation with you.
She could no longer deny or explain in her own mind the fact that she was really not the love object of Cody.
Once you discover that, you would feel betrayed.
But the trip had ended in far more than just a broken heart.
In Cancun, there was a heated argument, and according to Kathleen Denson, she was beaten up by Cody Boyd, flew back to Denver, and stayed basically in isolation because she didn't want to see anybody, and she didn't want anybody to see her blackened eyes and her very, very injured face.
She wanted things to work out between them. And instead, he started a relationship with her friend and with someone that worked for her. Someone who at some point in time was considered a confidant to her. And she had enough.
That was really the breaking point. That was the point of no return for Kathleen Denson.
When they returned to the U.S., Cody finally left the ranch and moved in with Monique. She was doing her best to move on from the betrayal when he unexpectedly showed up at her doorstep on June 27th.
On the day of the shooting, Kathleen Denson dropped her vehicle in town. She intended to take her 4Runner out on the road. She wanted to get some windshield time, some time for herself, and she enjoyed driving. When she got back to the ranch, it wasn't too long before Cody Boyd entered and began to threaten her.
Kathleen has said that he was trying to coerce her to give her another $300,000.
Fearing for her life, Kathy reached for something to defend herself with and wound up grabbing the antique pistol he'd given her. But in light of what they've learned so far, investigators find Kathy's version of events difficult to believe.
There were a number of different things that just didn't make sense in regards to what she was saying.
Cody was moving out his things from Kathleen's ranch and moving them into Monique's because he was going to live full-time with Monique. He didn't bring a weapon. He didn't have a gun.
On July 1st, 2002, 5 days after Cody's death, Eagle County prosecutors decide to formally charge Kathy Denson with second-degree murder.
This was the first homicide that I had investigated where there was this love triangle, and it just really muddies the water because there's so many different moving pieces.
I had concerns with a lot of people's credibility in the case. And that was an obstacle that we had to figure out, okay, what do we know versus what people exaggerate.
Coming up, the prosecution is betting that the evidence will prove their case. But will it be enough to get a conviction?
It was clear that she was a woman who was both terrified of the fact that she was charged with murder and horrified by the fact that she had had to commit murder.
"45-year-old millionaire Kathy Denson has been charged with murdering her ex-boyfriend Cody Boyd. If convicted, Kathy faces up to 48 years behind bars, but her attorneys seem confident she will be acquitted.
The prosecutors had an enormous burden. They had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Kathleen Denson did not act in self-defense. And from my perspective, the deck was stacked in favor of the defense.
He entered the home angry, came at her, and she picked up the black powder gun that just happened to be in the room and shot him. And it ended up killing him.
Based on the evidence, however, prosecutors are convinced Kathy wasn't motivated by fear. She was out for revenge.
He wasn't grabbing your neck. He wasn't brandishing a heavy object. They were having a heated conversation. Does that give one a license to kill somebody because you have an argument in your house and you are able to shoot them dead in the middle of the afternoon?
We had to show that there was a reason for the murder, that there was motive. But then at the same time, we also had to show that this also was not justified murder.
Prosecutors say that evidence taken during a search of Kathy's ranch house supports their case.
There was drug paraphernalia in the residence. There were a lot of videos that we had to go through.
There was a video of them snorting some drugs, we presume cocaine.
What got more publicity was the exotic gun collection and these videotapes that Cody and Kathleen made of themselves engaged in various sexual activities.
There was no indication of any type of violence being used. It looked very consensual, very caring.
The prosecution believes Kathy was still desperately in love with Cody.
The picture that was being painted was that Kathleen was a scorned ex-lover. She was not happy with Mr. Boyd. She had given him all these things to try to win his love, and she was just very upset. And then he came back that day. Kathleen just couldn't stand the thought of Cody not being with her anymore.
And while Kathy claims that Cody had a history of violence, the truth is he'd been lying to her from the start.
Cody Boyd was known to say a number of different things, grandizing himself maybe more than what he really was. It was something to take note of, but there was absolutely no evidence that he was any type of mafia hitman or hitman at all.
I'm not aware of any prior criminal history on his part. I'm not saying he didn't have any, but if he did, it certainly wasn't significant enough to leave an impression on us.
One of his kinks was trying to get respect as a feared hitman when there was zero evidence to show he had anything to do with that.
Prosecutors argue that because Cody posed no actual threat, Kathy never had a reason to shoot him.
She had no injuries. There was no indication that she had been in a struggle or that she was in fear.
And interestingly, Kathleen never claimed. She said he kept coming at me. I was frightened. She never claimed there was any physical contact between the two.
And ballistics evidence from the scene appears to prove the distance between them.
When a gun fires, it creates stippling from the burning gunpowder. He had stippling from below his knees, on his pants, up on his face, to the top of his head. That means that the cone of burning gunpowder was in excess of 4 feet.
The prosecution noted that there were 2 doors that Kathleen could have fled out of instead of picking up the revolver and shooting the guy.
They believe that once Kathy had made her choice, her intent was clear: to kill the man who betrayed her.
Kathleen Denson was not a stranger to firearms, but was hardly an expert markswoman. At the distance that she had to fire that black powder pistol, it would have been hard to miss center mass, and that's what she aimed for.
She took a very drastic course of action for which there was no coming back.
However, Kathy sticks to her claim of self-defense, and her attorneys argue that it doesn't matter whether Cody presented any actual danger. For her, perception was reality.
Kathleen Denson really believed that Cody Boyd was a hitman, maybe in a prior life, or maybe even then. Mostly, she knew he was the kind of guy that wouldn't hesitate to hurt her. He'd already done it in Cancun.
Mr. Robinson's theory was clearly that Boyd was attacking her and was about to commit or had committed a crime against her.
Coming up, the defense's argument gets put to the test.
It was a self-defense case involving a woman who was scared to death of a man who was in her home. What defense lawyer wouldn't want a case like that?
Prosecutors in Eagle County, Colorado have finished arguing their case for murder. Now it's the defense's turn to convince the jury that Kathy Denson only shot Cody Boyd to save her own life. Their argument hinges on the state's home defense statute, known as the Make My Day Law.
Under that law, Kathleen Denson had a right to use deadly force, even if all that would have happened would be getting beaten up again by Cody Boyd. She didn't have to let him hurt her before she could use deadly force.
Over the course of their relationship, Cody had built himself up as a dangerous hitman, so Kathy had every reason to believe he would kill her.
He had military-style weapons. He had conversions of automatic and semi-automatic weapons. He had the large banana clips. He was everybody's nightmare in a world where mass shootings have become all too commonplace. An astronomical number of firearms were in the home.
Some of them were altered to be fully automatic weapons.
To prove their point, the defense makes a surprising move, asking Kathy to describe what happened in her own words.
Kathleen's attorney, Scott Robinson, put Kathleen on the stand, which is pretty unusual in a murder trial because, you could say something wrong and cook your own goose.
When Kathleen testified. She was impeccably dressed. She, very attractive woman, very poised, articulate.
Appearance, dress, manner of speech, the way somebody wears their hair, the number of ums that they say. All of these things can impact jurors' perception of the credibility of a witness.
Kathy testifies that when Cody Boyd showed up at the ranch that day, he was enraged and also appeared to be high.
Cody Boyd had really wretched teeth, and Kathleen had agreed to pay for a complete restoration. Boyd was showed in the bill $20,000, and he was quite upset. She's immediately frightened because he looks crazed. He looks angry. He demands money.
One of the defense's pathologists did an autopsy on his own of Cody and found cocaine, and they found a sleep drug, I think halcyon, and they found, I think, THC from marijuana. And the pathologist said, these drugs could cause some people to get hostile.
He was in a drug-induced rage and was coming out hurt.
The fact that he claimed to have a darker past certainly played a factor.
The defense argues that whether Kathy intended to kill him or not, Cody had left her with little choice.
The defense felt that Mr. Boyd was coming down there, was being hostile and aggressive towards Miss Denson, and she felt no other recourse other than to defend herself.
Oftentimes, emotions will lead to immediate behavioral responses on people's parts. So there's no cooling off period. There's no time to think and to let the emotion calm down.
The timeline was easily established because he had just been at the dentist. We know exactly when the 911 call went in. So there really wasn't much of a delay between Boyd arriving at the ranch and Boyd receiving the fatal shock. Cody Boyd was high, he was angry, and he was going to go get what he had coming. Of course, as things turned out, he got exactly what he had coming.
But would the jury agree?
It was a very stone-faced jury. They were very hard to read.
The jury has a tough job to do. They're weighing somebody's life in their hands, and, they have to go with the information that was given here.
After only 2 hours, they return with their verdict. To the surprise of many, they find Kathy Denson not guilty.
The jury decided that she did not commit a crime, but it was a homicide. It was a death caused by another person.
Whether the jury acquitted Kathleen Denson because of the Make My Day statute or the self-defense statute or some combination of both, we'll never know.
Only 2 people were there that actually know exactly how it transpired. One of them was dead.
Everybody went home that day except for Cody.
It's a tragic case. It's tragic because I think a lot of people didn't feel that justice was served.
What began as the unlikely romance between a wealthy rancher and an itinerant cowboy has ended in betrayal and bloodshed. But the question remains, who is ultimately to blame?
Miss Seebacher, when she took the stand, there were a lot of inconsistencies with what she had said. So, it painted to the jury that she was not very credible, that, maybe she's a scorned person in this particular case. So I'm trying to seek revenge on Miss Denson.
The people who knew Kathleen Denson believed in her. There was no backlash. The impact on Kathleen Denson was a lot more subtle. Quite frankly, she has never gotten over the trauma of shooting and killing Cody Boyd.
我操！哎，真不，我说这不是一个级别的，那个，哎，这200不算贵，比北京那便宜。哎，我跟北京跳那个，就刚才你们看那视频，那是一个小湖，你知道吧？那个小湖，你给人感觉吧，反正也挺吓人。我操，这他妈面对整个大海，从那往下跳，远处，哎呦，我操，那制空感，妈吓死个人呀！吓死个人呀！这动漫体验是什么？哦，玩3D 啊！哦，这是玩3D。
Wonder if I could bring them to live. I could bring my lover. And baby, you make me wait. Now here I go, going back on the road. Now here I go, going back on the road. Now here I go, going back on the road. Now here I go, going back on the road. Welcome you back there again. Play the music back there again. I saw the looking out of the window. Wonder if I could bring them down. I could bring my love now, baby. You made.
Shorty, if you really wanna go, baby, then you gotta take me the mess. I tried to soak in all the years and take it all in, but I come up for a breath and cry. I gave my drama, gave my simple, gave my friends a helping hand. I bet you know that they are dead. I wish I could tell you this. The more we talk, the talk is not a tongue. The more we talk, the talk is not a tongue. I did not come this far for any stronger. All of a sudden there was nothing left. Well, last night a doctor thought you were lying. I never meant to keep you alive. There might be stuff we said that sound dumb to you, but to get a red wine and take it with a lid, I bet you know that they are dead. I wish I could tell you this. The more we talk, the talk is